related, so like prepare yourself. We start as we do every week. This week for the last time with announcements. Does anyone have any announcements? There's literally nothing that's going to happen between now and September, so there should be. Miss Becker?
If anybody has any go to the formal, you get your money to me ASAP. I would love you forever. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And with that, we have another announcement from Mr. Black.
Yes, just very happy I said last week. We're hoping to host a snap mock general election debate in the first week of June. Can I have again quick show of hands who would be interested in attending that in the first week of June? Okay. Also, the plan at the moment, subject to changes, but subject plan at the moment is that we'll have at least 4 speakers. It will be Labour, Conservatives, Lib Dems, and Greens. Possibly 2 of each. If you have any interest, get in contact with the council or whatnot. Also, there's the joint debate at QCon, Dragon Slayers. If anybody's interested in speaking at that, the motion again is probably going to be this House believes the book is better than the film. Again, subject to change, but it'll keep me posted. But if anybody's interested, let me know. There's also, over the summer, our outgoing beloved president has begun the motions of arranging, what is the exact wording of an LGBT open event?
Yes.
And that's, think of it as an ID, but specifically for those of the LGBT plus community. The main reason I bring that up is because we could do with crash, people letting people sleep on their floors. We don't need beds, we don't need anything, we just need floor space, and they will bring their bags.
Debaters will sleep literally anywhere.
On the stairs, on the roof, standing up, leaning against the wall.
Draw from that what you will.
I think that's all the internal meeting. What did we pick?
Subject to change roughly the 10th.
Roughly the 10th. So the internal meeting, for those of you who don't know, is when we decide the exact wordings of motions for next year. So please come on to that. Again, we'll keep you posted. But we should put up a spreadsheet, right? For suggestions. So that'll go up. Yes, that'll go up tonight or tomorrow. Fill that out, and you'll see more information about the actual event. That everything. That's we all good? Okay, I think that's all the answers.
No, and with that, for the last time out of the 160th session, I welcome Mr. Rob Whitehurst to read out the minutes of the last debate, and I'm actually going to remember it for once this week. This House believes all nationalism leads to xenophobia.
Thank you, everyone. Owing to the slightly rabid state of my fragility as well as the state of society, I couldn't find clean paper, so the back of my minute is written on baby massage. It's not to ask. The 22nd Ordinary Meeting of the Literary and Scientific Society took place on the 4th of May 2017 and was attended by 35 members. Private member of business was heard from President-elect Calvin Black, who wished to make the House aware of a potential joint event with Cuban Dragon Slayers, as he has done this evening, as well as a possible general election debate here at the Literific. Elsewhere, Tech Officer Chris Spratt asked for the House's opinion on the French election. Ms. Kira Campbell wished to one day have an ego big enough to name her political party after her own initials, as Emmanuel Macron had done with En Marche. Mr. Finbar Rogers asked that we forget about the French as a bunch of cheese-eating surrender monkeys, leading Chris Pratt to defend their honour. Mr. Whitehurst praised the Crystal Majestic style of French debate before Secretary-elect Peter Beck concluded that France would be amazing if it wasn't for the French. The President's questions are heard from Ms. Schieffer Dixon, who asked Mr. Murphy what he had for petit déjeuner. The President enjoyed pops de coco. Before finally, Ms. Kira Campbell asked Mr. Murphy about his collar, with the outgoing President knowing that he had to do something to signify his place within high society. Without further ado, President Murphy then announced the evening's motion, "This House believes all nationalism leads to xenophobia." Opening for the proposition was Ms. Schieffer Dixon. She began by labelling nationalism as the politicisation of culture, which creates an arbitrary binary between those who are and those who are not compatriots. She raised a very real issue of otherisation of nationalities and cultures from different from our own within society, commenting that a fixation on these imagined communities of countries makes universalism impossible. She asserted that xenophobia is simply the hatred or fear of what we don't understand, and nationalism only serves to calcify this ignorance. Opening for the opposition was Mr. Ryan Neal. He asserted the proposition had a very limited understanding of both emotion and nationalism. He lauded the idea of civic nationalism, where communities are formed based on similarity of culture and civility, rather than being established by race or religion. He claimed that this kind of nationalism allows for the positives of collectivism while still empowering individuals, for concluding that nationalism can be held responsible for individual cases of xenophobia. Speaking secondly for the proposition was Ms. Kira Campbell. She echoed Ms. Dixon's claims that nationalism creates an inherent othering of cultures, pointing towards the Muslim ban in the United States. She also rejected the opposition's claims that not all nationalism is negative, claiming that all its forms bring about territoriality based upon arbitrary borders. She concluded with philosopher Hannah Arendt's claim that nationalism makes worldwide human rights an impossible scenario. Continuing with the opposition was maiden speaker, Mr. Conor McNamara. He established that he was feeling particularly under the weather that evening and blamed at least a portion of that on the arguments of the proposition. He claimed that we are all products of civic nationalism, as is our very society. Mr. McNamara put forth that we have evolved nationalism for useful means, and that the proposition was ignoring the plight of pan-nationals. In what I'm now convinced is a conscious effort by the society to create a new meme, he concluded with a John Stuart Mill quote. Concluding the proposition was Mr. Richie Gallagher. He came clean and stated that he is an Irish nationalist, before making it clear that that one can support national self-determination without endorsing a nationalist ideology. He endorsed cosmopolitanism, a philosophy of viewing everyone in the world as equal regardless of borders and nationalities. He asserted that to be proud of one's nationality is wholly irrational, asking how anyone could take pride in being born by total fluke within the confines of arbitrary man-made borders. He concluded with a quote from Albert Einstein, which labelled nationalism as an infantile disease. Concluding the opposition in some of the debate was honorary life member Mr. Finbar Rogers. He opened by stating that one needn't hate someone else's home to appreciate one's own. In a whirlwind speech, Mr. Rogers claimed that we can't blame nationalism on Americans being thick, that Irish nationalism is indeed cosmopolitan, and that people like Nigel Farage should be allowed to define nationalism. He concluded by saying that all xenophobes are nationalists, but not all nationalists are xenophobes. Questions are heard from Mr. Jamie Muller, Mr. Peter Peck, Mr. Matthew Solomon, Ms. Lauren Corbier-O'Neill, Mr. Colin Black, and Mr. Chris Spratt. A vote based on House's opinion was taken, which read 7 ayes, 15 nays, and 6 abstentions. Or finally, a vote based on Speaker's performance was taken, which read 7 ayes, 11 nays, and 12 abstentions. May I take the minutes as read?
Business of the 168th session. So does anyone have any pressing business they want to bring before the society? Mr. Sullivan.
So, Theresa May said she's going to rule out any televised debates. And also, what she's sort of doing is she won't take any questions from reporters unless those questions have been pre-approved. My question to the House is, what do you think Theresa May is so terribly afraid of?
Mr. Macklin.
Just for some clarity, she right now actually is on LBC taking calls from listeners live, by the way, and she is going for a debate on BBC Question Time.
Nobody cares.
Theresa May's the first
Thank you for that from the Downing Street press office. Mr. Dillon.
Well, what I would say...
I ask that you stand up when you're making your point.
Sorry.
I will fine you next year if you don't stand up.
I genuinely do just forget what day it is.
I don't believe you.
So I'd like to address the point made by Mr. Matthew Sullivan that Theresa May is afraid. I would say the reason she's doing this is in fact the exact opposite. She is in fact so confident of the fact she can secure an election victory that all she needs to do is not completely muck it up. Theresa May doesn't have to try and make herself appear more desirable than Jeremy Corbyn because she's already done that. She just needs to sit still for the next month. I believe that would probably be the aim of refusing to do televised debates, pre-approved questions, etc.
And anyone else have any comment on that?
For a very small addendum to Hugh's point, he said that Theresa May made herself more appealing than Jeremy Corbyn. But I believe Jeremy Corbyn made himself less appealing.
Yeah.
To try and answer the question and for someone who occasionally procrastinates by watching primary questions. Maybe the answer is she's not very good at answering questions. And that's why she's hiding away rather than any confidence. And actually, in primary questions, the answers that Jeremy Corbyn comes with are more like cutting than sheep.
And I think the fact that Theresa May doesn't answer questions is probably quite a good note to end on, arbitrarily. Does anyone else have any comments? Prime Member's business, that's it, yeah. Yourself, sir, Mr. Governor.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to say that her performance in the one show was, a few days ago was evidence that, yeah, she isn't very good at interviews, and that's probably why she's opting not to do it.
Does anyone have any new items of business? Mr. McLean?
Well, the French election, congratulations to Macron. You know, we got a landslide victory, and I think this country really needs strong and stable leadership in the national interest. And it's not going to be the guy that pays police officers 30 quid to deliver it. You know?
Thank you very much for yet another press release from Downing Street. Yourself, sir?
Can we find Magdalena for political polemic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm disappointed that nobody actually brought me port tonight anyway, so damn you, sir, you're getting a fun. I want that noted. Does anyone else have any private members' business that doesn't infringe upon the Constitution? I'm just going to take your silence as that you all have private members' business and it all. Mr. Black.
Right, so I'd like to tell the House a short tale. We're doing a little week together. What was that? Beautiful conversation. It'll be good, I promise.
Yeah,
Yes,
you take it.
yes. You might
Get out, so.
There's a point more. So, as we all know, this is the last meeting that certain members of the certain members of the 168th Council would be chairing. And of course, we are all very appreciative to all of them. Quick round of applause for all of them. Yes, go on. I personally want to talk about one particular thing. I came to Queen's 4 years ago, and in my first year I met and made many good friends, many of whom went on to do absolutely nothing. But one, however, did go on to the starry heights of the literary presidency, and that was Mr. Benjamin Murphy. Mr. Benjamin Murphy and I have been very good friends for the past 3 years, but particularly over the past 2. And there's a amusing tale that some of you already know, which I think is worth telling again to those who don't. We both ran disastrous campaigns for literary positions in our first year. Utterly dreadful. We don't even speak of them.
Mine was worse than yours.
There's literally, I destroyed all the evidence of mine. What basically happened was that we all stood for something. I stood first, I believe, and my speech was dreadful. It was just absolutely shocking. I hadn't prepared anything. I can't do what Hugh does at all. I hadn't prepared anything. And I knew my speech was dreadful. Everyone knew it was sort of bad. And so rather than, being a good friend who stands by me through thick and thin no matter what, Ben instead decided to write on his vote for, what was it, Maximus Decimus Aurelius, commander
Commander of the armies of the North, General of the Felix Legion, husband to a murdered wife. And I will have my revenge.
In this life,
Or the next.
or the next. I, of course, was suitably hurt and aghast at this. So when it came time for Ben's, I didn't really even listen to be honest. I just completely ignored it and decided to write on my paper Cthulhu. For those who don't know, he is the elder god, long may he terrorize. And then this has been a beautiful conversation. I'm telling a story. What do you think? You're extricated. Oh God, because I don't want to take the end.
Cthulhu's not an elder god. He's a great old one. Elder gods are a totally different thing.
Indeed, I'm disgraceful. Well, nevertheless, that's going to be actually very relevant to your point in just a couple of seconds, because this has been a little tradition and joke that's gone on for the past couple of years. Anytime we've had an opportunity to write in for each other on a book, you would write in for the big long name for the guy from Gladiator, I would write in Cthulhu. And now that Ben's time at this society has come to an end, because of course he will return next year, but he won't be here every week like he has been for the past while. I personally wanted to give him a little something. The gift of the pen that we all saw him get at the contest, that was from the council himself, that's the tradition. Now this is for me personally, and as some of you know, because I got somebody to sign it. It is H.P. Lovecraft's The Necronomicon, the complete works of H.P. Lovecraft, including the stories of Cthulhu and the other eldritch abominations. I think that covers both.
Hold it up.
That's amazing. And there you go, that's nicely. So, the present. I insist on not crying until afterwards, so we're going to move very swiftly onwards to the President's questions so I can be more self-deprecating again, and we can all laugh at each other. So, with that, does anyone have any questions for me for one last final time? Miss Campbell.
What the hell is with your colour?
I thought that, for the last two semesters I've been wearing, one can say the best bow ties. Really great bow ties, like I do the best bow ties. I thought I'd sort of dress down to mark the occasion of my line coming to an end, like Prospero Di So I'm channeling sort of suburban Italian restaurant manager. Simon Cowell. I mean, take your pick. I don't know. Yeah, so. Yeah, it's symbolic, I guess. Yeah. I mean, the bow tie's there. You can't have it. No, that's not. No. Does anybody else have any other questions for me? Mr. Adair?
Since I never ask it, I'll ask it for the last time. What do you have for breakfast?
I have recently been reading, sort of, in my spare time, like accounts of what men on death row have. Like, that's where my mind wanders when I'm procrastinating. So, John Wayne Gacy had a massive bucket of fried chicken, and he had strawberries and all sorts of stuff, and he had a really great last meal. And I was like, do you know what? I'm going to make sure that the society knows that forever onwards I am well fed. That goes through the ages. And then I forgot that I had a tuna and sweet corn sandwich with it. And it wasn't even a good tuna and sweet corn sandwich. It was really. I was about to say, but it was really awful.
You didn't even finish it.
I didn't even finish it. I mean, she can testify about awful. Yeah, so that answers that.
You having breakfast with Kira?
To be fair,
You get there the night before as well.
she was following me around the library, trying to push her rubbish. I don't need to resign. And there's the beer. Any other questions before we last? Any other pressing issues that you want to ask me about? Why is there so many? Mr. Dolan, you.
What was the...
I still have that.
What was the best bit about being president of the Literary and Scientific Society?
People actually pay me attention. No, people finally appreciated the pinnacle of fashion that I am and always have been. In my beautiful bow tie. When I wore my bow tie to the conference ceremony last week, I had to negotiate with my mum because I actually picked a more floral one that she said was too gay. And I had to negotiate down to a multicoloured paisley bow tie, which apparently is less gay, but it's yeah, so people appreciate my bow ties I've come to. So yeah, you know who you are, all three of you. Thank you very much. With that, we'll take the last question. Yourself, Mr. Brother.
This is going to seem like such a rubbish question compared to the previous one, but how was your most recent train journey with TransLink?
So like 10 Downing Street over here, and PR or HR for TransLink over here. When was the last time I used TransLink? Okay.
How did you get into bed?
It was entirely forgettable. So, are you like implying something that I'm not aware of, or
No, I despise TransLink.
Oh. it was false. Mr. Whitehurst.
I'll have to let President's questions end on that, so. what was your favourite debate of your time here?
That's really difficult, actually. The one where I think I gave my best speech was possibly my favourite. Like, I think the EI debate was possibly my favourite, but joint with the one that I gave my best speech in, which was this house being a sex tape, actually. I thought I spoke very well about that. Yeah, I think that also happened to be my first debate, so I think it was all downhill from there. Yeah, and with that, I will stop talking with Johnny break. I will finally get on to tonight's motion. This House believes that cultural appropriation is cultural appreciation. Thank you, Ms. Feather, for telling me. And I welcome for the proposition, Ms. Elizabeth Jones.
Please bear in mind I'm very blind, so I've put this in the biggest font possible. So if I'm squinting, don't judge me. Okay. Can I see it yet? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Honourable Chairperson. I would firstly like to start by telling you what we, the proposition, see the motion to be. The statement cultural appropriation largely assumes the element of culture that is being appropriated is being done so harmfully. We, however, believe this is untrue, and it assumes cultural misappropriation, which is largely viewed as a violation of collective intellectual property rights. It assumes an innate malice within those who are seen as appropriating the culture. We, the proposition, believe that these people are indeed culturally appreciating, not culturally appropriating. Appreciation does not, nor in any way, need to imply the understanding of the thing which the person is appreciating. Take, for instance, enjoying someone's skirt at a debate and posting a picture on Twitter. This doesn't mean that you don't appreciate what the other people in the room are wearing. It just means that no knowledge of where the skirts come from that you might like. It is in instances such as these, although this may not be deemed as cultural appropriation, it is viewed as gender appropriation, which holds the same supposed bias behind it as that of cultural appropriation. Herein lies the problem. As previously stated, appropriation does not imply understanding. It does not unintentionally cause offence towards. It doesn't unintentionally cause offence towards those who may possess the expert understanding. As Ian will go on to explain later, there is a negative bias at play, although there have been extreme cases of cultural appropriation, as there is with any contentious issue, there are also underlying aspects ingrained into our culture that have been overlooked, such as yoga or that Indian takeaway you had for dinner last night. Surely, enjoying the new foods, activities and beauty trends that are brought in from other countries and cultures, whether those be from those people who have migrated to the country or from the information that is so readily available to us in this globalising world, is merely a way of showing how proud and appreciative we are as Westerners to be able to access them. Justin Bieber recently began sporting dreadlocks, and as a lot of people will know, there was a lot of negative press around this. Some say that this is cultural appropriation for Bieber to wear dreadlocks because it's a black hairstyle. However, dreadlocks have been appeared in many groups throughout history, from Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism to the Greeks, and of course African tribes and Rastafarians. Who is it to say that one group owns a hairstyle over the next group? Where do we draw the line? If you want to live in a diverse society where you're able to respect other religions, such as if you went to another country where it's considered disrespectful to have your hair on show, you would wear a head covering if asked. So why is it different for when other cultures come over to our country, in particular Ireland, and appropriate the traditions of cultures such as trad music or Celtic symbols? There are elements, of course, where those people are seen to be appropriating specifically religious symbols, such as a bindi or a turban. However, if a person is in fact aiming to convert to a specific religion, it is not a matter of appropriation or appreciation. It's about their own personal convictions and beliefs.
On that point?
No, thank you. In this 21st society, we would be fighting for a world where everyone has the right to express themselves. On the flip side, some of you may be asking, what about when people of colour bleach their skin to appear more westernised? And what the difference between this and Caucasian people putting their hair in dreadlocks is? This is a separate debate entirely. And and not to do with appropriation, as it is in fact to do with the homogenisation of the society, and the pressures of people of colour to appear more Caucasian or Western, and do not with either appreciation or appropriation. Overall, it is the manner in which we adopt other people's cultural symbols that determine whether it is a case for appropriation or appreciation. At many universities, like our own, a Greek toga party is a common sight. Yes?
You're still dealing with that in terms of a binary there of appreciation or appropriation, not so much as saying that appropriation is appreciation. So what makes them the same, essentially?
What makes... Can you clarify?
Essentially, you state these essentially that you're dealing with everything as if there are indeed harmful acts, which you would say, but there are also non-harmful acts.
Briefly, please.
I mean, come on. Say it,
and so a Greek toga party, which is a common sight of many festivals. While adopting the ancient Greek culture is fairly unlikely to cause offence, parties of this nature, in which people can be seen covering themselves in outfits and symbols which are in no way relevant to their own cultures, can cause offence, as they are showing, are showing no respect for the meaning behind the cultural symbols as they are trying to represent through their appearance. However, if someone is attempting to integrate with or show respect to another culture, they are clearly appreciating it for its meanings and origins. The circumstances in which a person uses another culture dictate whether their actions can be seen as appropriation or appreciation. Respect is key, and in the case that the person has genuine reasons for adopting a culture and educates themselves, then we as a proposition would argue that this is indeed appreciation.
On that point,
bless you.
I'm going to stand up for this. Do you mean to say that a toga party really is in proper respect of the philosophical ideals or the industry of ancient Greek society? Is it not just a lot more fancy dress up than that, and not really appreciation of what they actually mean?
Well, no, like I said, it's more to do with the fact that it depends who is kind of viewing it, and obviously it's something that isn't immediately deemed as something that is being appropriating, because it's obviously to do with like a more ancient society. However, it just depends on who you're talking to. Okay? Okay, thank you very much.
And over the case for the opposition, Mr. Jeremy Rose.
Dear Chairperson, Honourable Members of the House, today I stand before you white and male, and yet talking on the issue of cultural appropriation. I've had to educate myself accordingly. My sources include everydayfeminism.com. Some of these sites were enlightening. For instance, I learned that cooking foreign food without the permission of someone from the relevant culture could be cultural appropriation. On other sites, I've heard horror stories of professors at colleges being beaten by angry mobs of students for defending free speech. Now, how can a concept so ludicrous, defended by people seemingly so moralistic, have any merit whatsoever? But I would ask you for a moment to take a look at the motion, to go with me through these terms and unpack them. And then I'd like to show you sort of a perspective on why cultural appropriation might be a very bad thing. So what is appreciation, first of all? Well, in a sense, if you look at the definition, it's valuing something or enjoying something, recognizing the value within it. And appropriation is taking something, and I beg to differ with the proposition here, it's taking something without permission. It's taking something and representing it, and that's the key word. So we're talking about two things, valuing something and representing it. And I'd like to clearly make a distinction here between cultural exchange and cultural appropriation, because cultural exchange happens when two people share or exchange their backgrounds and their traditions. Cultural appropriation doesn't involve that, because it happens without contact, without permission from this other side. So essentially, I would like to assert my first point, which is that the act of misrepresenting something is not appreciating it. And cultural appropriation is necessarily misrepresenting something because of the lack of contact with the other side. So that's my first point. My second point is this. Appropriation, what it does often in practice, this is a consequentialist point, it ignores and it masks history, and it ignores underlying power dynamics within society. So as with any topic, context is vital. I'm not saying that everyone who attempts to appropriate culture is necessarily doing something terribly evil. But with some certainty I can say that many acts of cultural appropriation will involve minorities, groups that have suffered discrimination in the past, and often continue to. And so, what harm does wearing a Native American costume do, or dressing up as a member of the Sinti and Roma community? Well, 9 times out of 10, what you're doing is you're creating a caricature of that identity. You know, history creates identity, and oftentimes when we caricaturize identity, we sort of caricaturize history as well. We make light of it, we trivialize it, we mask it. And what we have to do to see injustice in our society, to really address it, is to see it as it is. And what I propose today is that what cultural appropriation does is it masks that kind of thing. It masks injustice because it masks what the cultures truly are and where they come from. And importantly, what it does is it separates people from their culture too, because when you appropriate culture, when you see people celebrating St. Patrick's Day in New York by dressing up as leprechauns and drinking green beer, you can obviously tell that has nothing to do with your identity. And what happens there is that something is being taken, I'll take your point in a minute, something's being taken and they're building upon it. But they're keeping the same name. This is the worst case of identity theft possible, because they're building upon it and they're separating you from what was essentially yours. So this is another problem. So what happens is we end up in a situation where we're perfectly happy to eat kebabs and curries, but where we might think that's perfectly consistent with not liking foreigners. We might say, we can't be racist, we couldn't possibly be racist, because we seemingly appreciate all these cultures. We seemingly have them so embedded in our society, so how could we still have problems with minorities in our society? But those problems clearly are still there sometimes. So I don't want to be the social justice warrior and say that all instances of dress-up are necessarily terrible. But I do want to say this. And I want to finish by saying what the proposition is arguing for tonight is essentially that no costume is too insensitive, no example is too ignorant, and there's no line to be crossed in this matter of culture. So, if even one argument on our side of the debate tonight rings true with you, I would urge you to oppose this motion. Thank you.
In the case of the proposition, Mr. Liam.
Just start with a few points of rebuttal. Jared talked about getting permission. I'm just maybe thinking, well, how does one go about getting permission from every culture ever, for any activity I ever do? You know, I do economics, and there's a thing called transaction costs. And well, if everyone was to go around getting permission, I can say for certainty there'd be no culture ever, and we'd all be sitting quite bored, alone in our rooms. So, I just want to go and tell a story, really. So this morning I woke up in my bed, and well, I was very tired, because I'm addicted to caffeine. So I began my morning by climbing out of bed with great pain to make a cup of coffee. Now, I know some members of the House probably don't enjoy coffee and prefer tea. while tea doesn't satiate my burning desire for caffeine, I can appreciate tea. After I finished my coffee, I went to the library. The library wouldn't be much of an exciting place if I wasn't able to listen to music and get away from the sounds of people grunting. Now, when I'm first in, please.
Are you sure you're in a library?
Sometimes I wonder if Sir Alan MacLeod would be happy with his name on that place. The library would be a much drearier place without music. Now, when we first admit that my music taste is probably in line with my culture, that won't be the case for everyone in this room. And it certainly won't be the case generally across the population. But when we find music we enjoy, we appreciate it. So, after I'm finished in the library and I've done my exams in a few weeks, and I'm free, I might decide to treat myself to a nice exotic cuisine. Where I will go, I don't know. Whether it's Japanese, Korean, or Thai, I'll appreciate it. I'll appreciate it because I appreciate how I spend my time. And how I spend my time is not solely made up of activities that are from my culture. What the opposition would have us believe, and what Jeremy said, is that these instances, they don't matter. What matters is the extreme. What matters is when you wear your Indian headdress, like you do every weekend. They exist, I don't know what that is. It's clearly something from the feminist website that we was talking about. Well, I believe these instances can be appropriation and can be offensive. I don't believe they represent what we're talking about here. We're talking about here is culture. We're talking about appreciating your daily life and the things that make up it.
On that point, sir?
No, it's okay.
Oh, sorry.
Actually, no. I'm not looking anywhere near done here, so.
Okay, go ahead.
When I drink tea, that's cultural appropriation. When I bread for sushi, that's cultural appropriation. When I listen to hip hop, that's cultural appropriation. No. But I appreciate all these things. I may say I'm being anecdotal, but I represent my culture just as much as anyone else. And I'd be sad if you could find me a person who simply filled their lives with appropriative activities out of malice and hatred of another culture, rather than out of fulfillment and enjoyment of their own lives. Now I completely changed what I'm talking about. I was reading, while thinking about this motion and why someone might disagree with it, I was thinking that, well, it seems that these very extreme cases get a lot of press in the media, and it made me think of a thing I've read about before, known as negativity bias. And this is where it's a psychological phenomenon where negative and positive stimuli of equal size are reported that the negative stimuli are a sociological phenomenon will be perceived to be of greater magnitude. So I was reading an article called Bad is Stronger Than Good in the Review of General Psychology, and they gave a great example of how this bias would work, and I'm going to draw a parallel with this motion this evening. They give an example of social rejection in groups of children. They measured the most popular children and the rejected children, and they found that the consistency of reports across the children, the parents, and self-reporting of children agreed far more about who was rejected than who was popular. So in other words, all perspectives agreed more about who was rejected than who was popular. All perspectives agreed more about who was rejected than who was popular. So the analogy I want to make is this. It seems that all perspectives agree here more about the non-appreciation than appreciation. Without running the risk of being rude, I want to say that you do not check your privilege, but that you check your bias. You drink tea, you practice yoga, you eat sushi.
Point, sir. On that point.
If we truly believe your daily life and the activities that you use to fill it are less important or less relevant than Miley Cyrus twerking or Katy Perry wearing a bindi, then by all means vote against this motion. But do so in the understanding that you may be a victim of your own mind, evolutionarily programmed to seek out the bad over the good. So, I make a final plea that you vote in favour of this motion tonight. Thank you.
And continuing for the opposition, Mr. Hughie Dillon.
please come near me again for another beer?
A round of applause again for Mr. Liam Mackle, who was making his maiden speech in this.
Alright, yo dogs, let me just say I'm super stoked to be here tonight. My homies. Now I'm going to start off this debate in the form of a rap. No, I'm not. But you're all taking, I'd say you were probably all caught off guard by the fact I started my speech off like that. Whether I was trying to appropriate if it was, I don't know, black or London gangs, I'm not sure what. Norse. It didn't sound right, did it? No, it didn't, because that's what cultural appropriation does. We take on things that do not belong to us in a way that, as Jeremy said, creates a caricature. And there's nothing about that which is appreciated. Now, I'll get into my main points, but first about some things that Proposition have already said. About the point Lily first brought up about what cultural misappropriation is. Now, I'm going to go to my first source of tonight, which is my good friend, Mr. Oxford Dictionary. Now, their definition of appropriation is when we take something without the owner's permission. Now, this goes back again to what Jeremy has already said. The point is, when we appropriate something's culture, then we are doing so without A, receiving permission from, I don't know, the culture which owns it, or we do not take proper appreciation for its history. No. The point was made by Mr. Liam Mackle about how we like to sort out the negatives, about how there's a consensus on that. The reason for this partly falls to cultural appropriation, because as Jeremy has already outlined, this is because we create caricatures of history. I've probably said that phrase about 5 times now. It's a wonderful phrase. So, the point being that whenever we take cultures in this kind of way, whenever we bastardize it for our own use, whether it be certain foods, whether it be yoga, we don't properly understand where it comes from. What this leads to is us taking it for granted. We would be more welcoming of these groups, of these minorities, of different cultures, if, in integrating parts of their culture to our society, we took proper respect for where it came from, where it's going, and what it properly signifies. This is what Jeremy already spoke about when he talked about cultural exchange. Yes?
You don't need to. You don't need to know the whole backstory behind your dinner. It's the point of cultural mixing and fusing is that you take the best bits from others and integrate it into your own, and surely that's for the benefit of all humanity, history aside.
But we need to be careful about the ways in which things are integrated. Obviously, food is pretty much free game. We had potatoes, someone else has, well, you don't grow curry, but you get a point, sir. So, what the bottom line becomes is the point where we then stop properly exchanging culture. Instead, appropriate it. We don't buy Chinese food from a restaurant without paying for it, without, as I said, getting permission or learning how to cook it. That's pretty much all there is to the backstory. In that case, we're not creating a caricature. But it comes in more extreme forms of appropriation where the true danger lies. No. If I were to show up today wearing, say, a Native American headdress, this doesn't mean that I don't actually appreciate where it comes from, but the item, the symbol, has a reverence behind it, a spirituality, which means I am not qualified to wear it. We need to accept that certain symbols of other people's culture... What?
As an atheist, I say spirituality is bullshit. So.
That's the next session's first call.
I thank Kieran Gallagher for pointing out his religion. I'm not sure of the relevance. However, the point is that we have to accept what certain symbols mean to other people. We don't start integrating it into our own culture without properly accepting where it came from. No. So, misrepresentation is not appreciation. I already mentioned the example there of this thing always comes back to Halloween costumes because it's probably the most contentious example, and that's why I'm going to draw attention to it. When we misrepresent a culture like that, then it creates harm. I go back to caricatures because we then create this idea about who people are. And then cultures, people, they become marginalised. And we start to think that, it's not really a problem to start misrepresenting things. That's only a few steps away from racism. By normalising appropriation, we normalise us not taking proper regard for other cultures in our society, especially those ones who are traditionally ignored or have, yes.
Okay, so we talked about representation and misrepresentation. I mean, what you're really talking about is how that culture would wish to be represented, which may not be an accurate representation. For instance, the purposes of parody. Certainly a politician who's had, say, a caricature drawn of them can say that they've been misrepresented, but others may say it's quite accurate. So in terms of appropriation in that sense, how would you define your motion?
Because what I see as the purpose of parody is far different from that of the traditional appropriation, the kind that I'm talking about. The kind which is ignorant to culture's meaning, where it comes from, its symbols, its significance. Whenever something parodies something, if it's a good parody anyway, it will properly understand its source material. It will understand where it's coming from. And so, yes, it maybe doesn't necessarily have permission, as we would say is normally is not the case in appropriation, but we are still trying to draw attention to things as they are. The issue with cultural appropriation is that we take things in a way that doesn't show them how they are. So, what I will ask you is, how do we move forward in having proper cultural appreciation? And it comes out in what has already been said here today. We do not blatantly take symbols across the world in a way that does not properly represent the way they are. If it is a religious symbol, we must properly treat it as such and understand that religion, and if it's necessary, be a part of it before it's something we can start calling our own. If it's a cultural symbol, for example, I wouldn't stand up here wearing a pioneer pin because I have not prayed to the souls every single day and I have not been not drinking for however many years. It's this matter of qualification. And we need to accept that there are certain aspects of culture which require this. For all these reasons, we've seen that cultural appropriation is harmful to minorities and marginalised groups, and it continues to de-educate society about what these things actually mean. To conclude, it's clear to me that cultural appropriation is cultural defamation. Thank you.
And to conclude the case for the proposition this evening, I welcome the floor of Mr. Kieran Gallagher.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just making your homies joke, but there we go. You could say that joke was appropriated. Now, a couple of things. There's almost too much to wrap up, but one note that I've heard so far is things about ownership and permission needs to be acquired. Now, isn't it dangerous, I find, when we're talking about cultural insensitivity, and we're veering on racism as well here, isn't it dangerous to assume that a culture holds unanimous consensus? Isn't that treating one culture, and culture is a very, very strange thing, anthropologists can't even make up their minds what entirely it means. For example, if you talk about African ethnicity, you're talking about a continent of millions of people with a north, south, east and west, all sorts of cultures going on. You can't simply talk about Africans and what Africans consider to be okay and what not.
On that point,
sure, go ahead.
so do you then offer yourself up as the authority to decide? Are you then safe in authorising yourself as the authority to say what symbols can be safely appropriated or where these foreign cultures' consensus lies?
Great question. I was just about to come on to this. I'm not convinced that anyone has that authority. After all, who would you? If you think about your own culture, now I know many of us come from some of the most privileged cultures on earth, but to whom would you give the job of deciding for you and for your culture, for your people, for your community, what is allowed to be used or expressed or distorted from your community? Go ahead. Oh, no, President of Ireland, the wee short fella.
I've
think he was elected more on the point of political representation to an extent that it, yes, inherits cultural representation, but it's missing the point of it. Anyway, in any case, even if you were to take the disapproval of one, as remember, does not mean the disapproval of many. And even then, the disapproval of many, even the majority, does not make that disapproval reasonable. And this is another problem. The term cultural appropriation is terribly, terribly broad. It has been described as everything from blackface, I don't want to go into the details of that, all the way down to, as has already been said, things like doing yoga, performing that sort of thing. Here's an interesting case. There is a culture, an art form known as jazz. Now, where did jazz come from? Obviously, it originated in the States, but you could say that it came from the roots of African-American blues music. It came from African continental percussive rhythms, and it also came from European dance rhythms. So who owns jazz? It's split across 3 continents now already. Who is the owner of that? I mean, I know people have taken umbrage at the fact that Iggy Azalea, for example, being, I think I'm talking about the right person here anyway, is a white woman performing rap, for example. I actually disagree with this as well, not because she's white, but because she's just not very good at it. I should do that one. Let's see. Now, another thing I wanted to cover actually, yes, was intent. So, I think there is a sort of consensus in the room that cultural appropriation as a result of ignorance is not the same as flat-out racism. I think the room's more or less on the same page about that. But too often are they grouped as the same? There must be a distinction, surely, because intent must count for something, because deliberate racial nastiness is totally different to ignorant misuse. For example, people who actually harbour truly racist thoughts and real racist malice actually don't tend, if you'll notice, to want to associate with the cultural means and the cultural elements and symbols of those cultures they want nothing to do with. You don't see many people with both a swastika on one shoulder and a Star of David on the other. It just doesn't tend to happen.
On that point, sir.
Go ahead.
So far you've been arguing that cultural appropriation is not that bad, but that's not the same thing as saying that it is appreciation. And then also you focused on the issue of permission, but really what that embodies is more just contact with the other culture, not necessarily verbal consent or written consent, but just contact, being able to have a claim to the truth.
2 points I'm going to get on to. Actually, I'll get on to them now. So, the first was, we've talked about how appropriation is not a bad thing. How is appreciation? As Lily said in her opening statement, it doesn't need to be well informed, and it doesn't need to be actually respectful for it to be appreciation. Appreciation can take the form in both an origin of ignorance and an origin of well-informed understanding. By the way, this is another thing we assume about cultures, that because someone is from a certain culture, that they themselves are well versed in their own culture. Now, I know loads of people who couldn't tell me in Ireland what the difference between a reel and a jigget. I know plenty of Irish people who know the first 2 lines of their national anthem and don't know the damn rest of it. Shame on that. Anyway, I'm closing on my time, so I better get on with this. Now, of course, there is the issue of privilege and societal hierarchy, and that is a difficult question, which brings me on to the second point there. Surely, what I'm getting from the opposition, I think their work is all ahead of them if they're trying to assert that we need to be some more exclusionary with this. I think it is much better idea, however uncomfortable, however nasty the trial and error phase may be, to actually have a much more open discussion and see where each other's pressure points are. Obviously not going too far with that, but to sum up, firstly, as I said, true informed appreciation and ignorant appreciation are never nevertheless appreciation. Secondly, it is through appreciation, inappropriate or otherwise, that art may evolve and develop a continuing tapestry of heritage. I'm sorry I didn't get to talk more about that. And the complexity and differences between each case is so nuanced in this debate that a policy of exclusion, as I said, can only be inferior to an open discussion. So let's have a little humanity and try it out, okay? Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to point out that the last speaker tonight is also simultaneously streaming the debate, playing as photographer, also tweeting. If you look, is it? Oh, you're tweeting, right? Well, he's doing photographer and he's streaming and he's also speaking tonight. If you look very closely, he's also got a set of symbols strapped to his knees as well. So, for one night only, I welcome the Honourable Tech Officer for the 168th session for his last speech and appearance in this institution, Mr. Chris.
Welcome back. Now, if you're officially banishing me now from the litter, you're not that's not wearing this, are you?
You're an HLM.
No. God's sake, man. Kids, I've always hated this thing here, with the thing broken off on the bottom of it. Not on this side. No, time it. Only time it when I tell you to time it, right? And maybe add a little bit more because we've got a lot of notes here. A surprising amount of notes, people, for unfortunately, me and Mr. Jeremy, me and Mr. Jeremy do this in matter of hours, was it not? Yes. So we've had to trawl the internet and try and find different things for your amusement. What are you doing? Okay, I'm going. Right. So here we go. So we've heard a number of things tonight, and I suppose I have to do this sort of rule as we're meant to, as final closing summarisation, and try to address a couple of points of rebuttal and bring back to ourselves some of the points made by my honourable colleagues here. And I got up earlier and I have to say I stumbled through my words, which doesn't happen too much these days, thankfully. And it was in addressing Miss Lily Vedder's point, or my point towards Miss Lily Vedder. And the reason I suppose I was so very confused in what I was trying to say there was that I believe that my argument was in fact quite similar in premise to hers. Because I believe that there are two different things that this debate is prejudiced on, that is cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. And I believe that the two are mutually exclusive. The reason for this is that cultural appropriation is simply the cherry picking of certain aspects within a culture, without really context or anything originally from that culture. Now, you might appreciate your curry or your library or your various other different things which you brought up, but you don't actually appreciate the culture from which those items really. Yes. How do you know? Appreciation and not appropriation. Yes, which is the point of this debate, because those are two different things. The clear point of this debate, and I'm jumping around these notes like a jackrabbit, is that the core to it all is intent, and it is the understanding, it is the background, the context to the act itself. It's whether that act in itself is expressing and engaging with that culture, appreciation of that culture, or it is simply making use of such an item for some ulterior motive, whether that's because you look good in like tribal tattoos or something, or you want like Japanese language on your arm because that looks cool. God knows what it says, but that's the real difference. It's a matter of context, and simply you can't really treat every single act with a big broad brush, which I believe is what the proposition are really trying to do tonight, in stating that appropriation is appreciation, because not all acts are indeed the same and have different contexts. Now, if we look at such instances, such as, I've lost this point here. So essentially, yes, it's a cherry picking of ideas without any real context to that culture, and whatever baggage might be associated with that culture, for example, racial or historical difficulty. And it can't even be considered really as taking a holiday in that culture, because you're just using it. There is no real context at all to it.
On that point?
Yes.
I think the line you're drawing here with the use of other cultures is arbitrary, especially when you consider the nature of culture, and that takes music, food, places. It's very diverse, very complex reasoning behind people would want to get involved in that. I think it's cynical to admit that wanting to get involved in other reasons apart from like a deep intellectual interest in it is
But I believe that I don't think you're actually addressing this at all, because engaging it with these other, you're not then appreciating that culture. You're not appreciating the characteristics behind that culture, which has resulted in that item or act or piece note that has resulted in that culture. It is a context versus a lack of context. Which one of you was it who brought up the idea of you don't need to know the background to your dinner? The background to your dinner is the culture of your dinner, from where it resulted from. Whatever forms or historical acts resulted in the production of your curry, your different dishes, your Szechuan chicken. Yes?
It's all well and good you saying that, but like, if you have a Chinese over here, it's extremely different to an actual Chinese because they mutated it in order to fit Western ideals. So it's like, it's not necessarily the same, and like you don't need to know the culture behind that because it's been cherry-picked for us, as it were.
But then you're not appreciating the culture is the thing, though.
Yeah,
but that's the core of this debate, is it not? It is that cultural appropriation is a cultural appreciation, which self-evidently it is. It's a simple use of various items from a culture without that context. And I've been rambling because I've been quite distracted, and I haven't actually done a serious debate in some time. No, I've done some debate, I haven't treated it so seriously. I'm not here to say whether an act of cultural appropriation is good or bad. But the truth is, I don't believe that we can address all forms of cultural interaction in a blanket manner. Some are appropriative, making use of aspects with neither understanding nor interest in it, where others are truly appreciating, engaging and learning from different cultures on all levels, good and bad. And really, yes, this is quite a difficult thing, really, because Mr. Ollie Donnelly made a point earlier on and just stated, but it is. But it isn't, rather. And I quite get where it comes from, because I believe that they are two very distinctive and really separate ideas. And that's why I believe that, because of these conceptual differences, that you have to vote this motion down.
The round of questions. Can I have any questions for the proposition?
All of you. So there was an interesting point that was hit upon earlier, I think needs a bit more expansion, which is the
the evolution of jazz. I was wondering what you thought about the idea of, and sometimes use a horrible technical term, Hegelian dialectics as you call it, culture. The idea that rather than cultures being these two monolithic things who have ownership and crossover is inherently this kind of misuse of them, that rather our own cultures are synthesis of previous cultures, and therefore you appreciate them by appreciating your own culture, because it's a much more fluid thing than what's made out to be by some of the arguments I've heard tonight. Robinson.
Stand up.
I don't know why I'm answering this, because I actually got caught up in what you were saying and missed the question. What was the question?
The question of the evolution of jazz, it's basically this last point, the idea that culture is a synthesis of previous cultures, and therefore we do.
So you want me to expand on that?
Yes, essentially.
Okay. Look, I'm actually very, very glad of the opportunity to do it, because I think it's very, very true to say that the culture culture is a communally forged, ever-changing artistic project. I think is as good a definition as you can come up for it. And art only evolves by the exchange of ideas. Now, the exchange of ideas is something that can't always be taught. It can't always be discussed. Ideally, it'd be great if it was, but it can't always be, realistically. So, yeah, for example, the cultures that we associate ourselves with now were not what they were 100 years ago. They would have been something different 500 years ago and 1,000 years ago. There's so much changes. I mean, English culture would have changed significantly since the Norman invasion in 1066, for example. Or other things like the breakup of the Roman Empire into various European factions, the Byzantines, the Holy Roman Empire, which actually wasn't really Roman. Anyway, never mind. The point is, it's how art evolves. You exchange ideas and something comes out of it that isn't necessarily better than some of its parts, but is different, it's intriguing, and if it's useful in one sense or another, it catches on, it survives. And anything that isn't dies out. That's why evolution is such a good analogy for it. I hope that kind of wraps that up.
Opposition without response?
Well, you're talking about this issue as if in terms of the long-term view, and in the long term I completely agree with you about the evolution of culture, but these problems don't arise over a period of 100 years, they arise in the present. And what's more, there are sometimes historical institutionalized separations that were created which prevented this synthesis of cultures, and we're still dealing with those. And so while we're still dealing with those, perhaps it's better to give this concept of appropriation some serious consideration.
All right, and then we'll take a question for the opposition. Mr. Bishop.
Mr. Chris, that's all right. You made the strong point there, sort of, that Lily's argument was very similar to your own.
Yeah.
And I basically disagree with that. I think this is all very ad-lib at the minute, but I think what Lily was trying to say was more that there are two kinds of appropriation, which are inappropriate appropriation and appreciative appropriation, whereas what you were saying were two separate entities. So I'm just wondering, what would you say to that? Do you think that there is any form of appropriation, so to speak, or is it all inappropriate?
Well, ultimately, I'm not here to pass judgment about whether appropriation is good or bad. No, that's the truth of it. This motion is not about whether appropriation is good or bad. The point is that appropriation is different to appreciation. Now, appreciation of a single thing, of a single item that you might enjoy, your tea or your whatever, that doesn't mean that then you have that context behind it all. Appreciation is the engagement with that culture in a meaningful manner. And that's where I believe actually it comes into the likes of jazz and the evolution of jazz in different cultures. Whereas appropriation is simply just taking something because, various other reasons, not real engagement with the culture underlying that very thing. So yeah.
Brad, would proposition like to respond to that?
I think it was our fault we didn't address this, but I think of appropriation as a scale, a sort of distribution from supreme misappropriation to supreme extreme weird fetish. And this is the diagram of 3 years. So I think the opposition approach right along the hard end of the spectrum with the misappropriation and the negative aspects of the culture. Well, my own point is that the main center of the distribution is actually, it's not that bad.
I am just amazed to see someone other than John McAlee. Very well done yourself, sir. Does anyone have any abstaining points on the motion? Something to think that neither side really addressed adequately yourself, sir?
No? Right, I just want to talk about the phrase intellectual property for a second. Lily brought it up and then it was sort of assumed throughout the debate, I think. Now, I'd like to state the contentious point that intellectual property doesn't exist. You can't actually own an idea. Things like copyright only exist as a tool within the capitalist system to award people for having useful ideas in a monetary way. But you don't actually own ideas. Anybody can have an idea, and two people can have the same idea, so how on earth could you own the idea?
Proposition, yeah, first round of response.
Yeah, cultural or intellectual property was invented in the 17th century in Britain. So yeah, actually appropriate culture, you have to appreciate the 16th century British people. So the appropriate you must appreciate, and it's for the farce already.
This debate is getting far too messy. I have no idea what's going on. Mr. Dobbin, you want to talk about it?
I'm going to put an end to this cultural context appreciation tripe. I'm going to do so by drawing the House's attention to my shirt. Alright, so take it off! Clarification on the point that Chris made, which is whenever you're appreciating something properly, you're not appropriating it, and vice versa. If you see here, my t-shirt has Thor on it, alright? Now, we can see here where the lines between appreciation and appropriation are drawn. Now, we talked about enjoying something and whether or not that's appropriation or not. Any average Joe could wear this shirt, and anyone can enjoy that. That's appreciation of a shirt, but it's not appropriation of a culture. Because the culture surrounding this shirt is, names like Starlin, Kirby, McNiven, Aaron, and a bunch of other comic book nerd names I'm not going to recite. But the point is that when someone's appreciating this shirt, they're not at the same time appropriating the culture. Now, at the same time, whenever someone does appropriate the culture, if they were saying they knew everything about what Thor, what the comics were about, and they didn't, then they are appropriating it, but they are not appreciating it. Whenever you are appreciating an item of a culture, not the culture itself, you have not appropriated it. On the other side of something, whenever you are appropriating something,
The item is the act in itself.
Is that not okay?
But that...
It's the woman that was one second. It's not helping your case. So
the point is... Therefore, it is not our place to say whether appropriation is good or bad, but clearly, when you're appropriating, you're not appreciating. It was way more complicated than
And with that, we'll take another round of questions for the side of the proposition. Was
it off?
Was that not two?
That was an abstaining point. So, yes, Mr. Rennie.
Thank you. I think it's sort of abstentionist, but it's also a wee bit towards the opposition.
That's not a problem.
Beer! We give you beer! Go!
Proposition question.
Can I ask for some clarification on the proposition? What point the proposition are making? Are they saying that all appropriation includes appreciation as a part of that? Is that what you're putting forth as your motion? The example was put forth several times tonight has been curry. And the framing of this has been just popping down to your local Indian restaurant and buying a nice biryani or something. But what if we look at it in a more historical context? How did we originally get curry to this country? It involved a huge amount of violence and British imperialism in India. So that ensured cultural appropriation, but were British truly appreciating Indian culture at that time?
Proposition?
Okay, I'll give this a whack. So, what you've just described there, I don't think is fair to fall under cultural appropriation. That is cultural. That could be described as cultural misappropriation. I would also describe it as even cultural theft, if you want to go that far. It's, as I said, this is a very complex and nuanced thing. I know exactly how there is behind every culture there is often a heritage and a real history with lots of details that many people of those cultures aren't even aware of. And it is complicated because the history of these cultures are complicated. And it also involves the fact that histories on a scale as small as local tribes to nations, continents apart, you will have had bloody struggles. It's so complicated. So can we please return to appreciation, not cases where, as you said, where we're talking about plunder and theft and things like that.
Opposition?
Nope. You did it.
Okay,
Son of.
Well, I suppose what I was talking about when it was the curry was the point again that things that are appropriated then like that are not properly appreciated. You know, it's whenever we are then, if we enjoy curry in that way, sure we can individually enjoy the item, but we're not appreciating the culture as a whole. And if we reached ourselves to the point where yes, we do appreciate the culture as a whole, we were acknowledging the imperialism, the strife, the cooking techniques, whatever else is necessary, then at that point we're no longer appropriating. So it comes back to the point that once we're appropriating something in culture, we're not appreciating it. And if we bring ourselves to the point where we proper appreciate a culture, then we're no longer appropriating it. And that's why the terms of the debate become paradoxical, because as soon as we have one, then the other becomes extremely hard to have or retain. That's what I think this debate is really about. So.
Out of that question for the opposition. Yeah, Mr. Rennie, why not?
Sorry, I got that wrong first time. With regards to cultural appropriation, just you just mentioned there about how if you take something on, you're not appreciating it. We mentioned about jazz. Let's take rap. Because of my travels in America, I actually know a few black people now, I can say. Many black people will admit that what Eminem did to rap was cultural appropriation and appreciation. How far he developed it. Whenever we look at EDM, that literally originated in one of the dirtiest black movies in England called Salford. And look at what it's done to the European continent and the whole world. That is cultural appropriation and appreciation in motion. And so to say that you can't have that, I think, is ingenuous. Disingenuous.
Really, such things will probably be a very contentious issue, especially considering the incredibly diverse makeup of the house we have here tonight.
You're trying This again comes back to what Chris said about cherry picking. It's when we're taking rap, it's what I think is disingenuous is to say that the entire culture of rap is appropriated. Something as vast as that, and which is created by so many people, to try and say that that's one culture, to try and put that into a singular block, I think is unwise. And so to say that anyone can appropriate and appreciate it in its entirety, I think doesn't sound right. Because if we had the entire context of everything, it creates a culture which is so vast that no one's capable of appreciating or appropriating it. So if someone's appropriating certain parts of rap, or as Chris said, cherry picking, then are they appreciating it? I would say so.
Proposition, if you'd like to respond. Take a sit there looking big into the
All I wanted to say was on your t-shirt.
Stand up.
On your t-shirt, for starters, as a person of Norwegian descent, I'm quite offended. What was the question?
I was just saying how appropriation is appreciation in so many aspects, and to say that it isn't is disingenuous.
Yeah, I agree.
One last abstaining point of motion. Someone who's known for his abstaining on pretty much every walk of life.
Thank you, Mr. President. And as someone again, something James said, I would like to point of clarification on this entire bit. I'm so confused. Way around the motion was anymore. Appreciation and then appropriation. I just don't know. So I'd like to ask a simple question. Not confusing at all, very black and white, hopefully. Can either side provide me an example of when cultural appropriation, let's just take it, let's say, and I was really defined for it, let's say appropriation is bad. Let's just say that. Can anyone provide an example of when cultural appropriation actually leads to someone suffering from physical harm, and don't just say like, oh, a poorly cooked meal could lead to food poisoning. I mean, like, actually, when has someone or appropriate someone's culture for the purpose of inflicting physical harm? Can anyone think of anything
that? Proposition, you get first right response.
Well, obviously I don't want to give an example of what would counter the motion that I'm proposing. I'll give a counter example. Appropriating culture is good. So, say for example, after the Second World War, when the Nazis and lost, and all of their engineers were taken from Germany, and they were retired, we got to the moon. Cultural appropriation got us to the moon. So,
I have to say that really is the most abstaining question I've ever heard, because we aren't here to address that question whatsoever. No, back and forth. We really aren't here to address whether cultural appropriation is good or bad. In fact, anyone can come up with a certain example of whether they do. But what we are here to discuss is whether cultural appropriation is appreciation. And I believe because of the definition of cultural appropriation as an act of taking from a culture without any appreciation of the historical or whatever bits of... I keep saying this word, but it is absolutely critical to the entire thing. You are without context. And without that context, you can't appreciate that context. Cultural appreciation is the appreciation of culture, of context, not of things. So we're not really going to address that question.
I like to point out to neither side giving an answer.
do that more often. Work better together. Right, back by popular demand. There are quite a few hands up, so I think we'll go for another round of questions on both sides. Well, I was just going off what he told me, to be honest. I'm not going to start doing that anytime soon. Okay, one more question. This can be to either side. Ryan, you seem like an eager beaver.
Yeah, okay, so this is a fitting question, right? Because we really need, as Calvin said, to define our terms here, which I feel we've done an abysmal job. So let's look at the motion, right? The motion is cultural appropriation is cultural appreciation. That is a statement implying equivalence. So if we're dealing with anything that implies equivalence, A must imply B, B must also imply A, therefore they are equivalent. So what we have to say is that for every instance, at least with proposition, you have to say that for every instance of cultural appropriation, it must also be cultural appreciation. You must prove this. Then you must also show that for every instance of cultural appreciation, it is also appropriation. So, can you put forward an argument to propose that, to prove that, and can you disprove that?
Okay. So, I'll take this in two parts. Cultural appropriation and appreciation. Cultural appropriation is the use by expression, if you like, of one element of a culture by a party from a different culture. Is that clear, or do I need to find another way to say it? Great. Anyway, the second part, appreciation. You all know what appreciation means. Right, okay. So appreciation is, I would say, to positively receive the positive reception of an idea. Let's go with that. I've done for that. Anyway, so now it is possible to receive an idea and to use that idea without fully understanding the full details of the context from which it originated. Have I still got it? Anyway, so, as I said already, in order to appreciate a culture by using it, does not mean that you have to be informed by it. It may well mean that you may cause an offence, you may have misunderstood or misinterpreted it in an offensive or inappropriate way, but that is, as the opposition pointed out, not the point. The point is, it is nevertheless appreciation, whether or not it is benevolent. And I've run out of steam.
Opposition. Right, well, first of all, I'd just like to disagree with you there about your interpretation of the motion. I think it's perfectly possible that this motion doesn't imply equivalence. It can just imply if-then statements. So if appropriation, then appreciation. And just like to start with that, I would also like to respond to the point about definitions. I tried to make clear what my interpretation was, and I think I agree with Mr. Gallagher here about both actually. First of all, appropriation it's more than just. What was your point again? It's
use by expression.
Use by expression, right? Expression. And so expression for me is the same as representing something. So those are similar words. For me, that's what this was about. Appropriation was representing something, and appreciation was receiving it well, an idea, or perhaps another way of saying that is value, right? So if we have something like, and if we say appropriation involves also some kind of contact with the other culture, it involves some kind of, well, not necessarily consent, but at least a cultural, appropriation involves the absence of that. So appropriation involves the absence of contact with another culture, the absence of an exchange, and that's precisely the problem, because it implies that appropriation is necessarily misrepresentation, and that you can't necessarily value something that you aren't aware of. Because if you have misrepresented it, then you're unaware of it, you don't really understand it, and that's so.
this session. Firstly, the vote of prior opinion. So if you're all in support of the motion before you enter the room tonight and have the arguments, please raise your hands and say aye.
Aye.
And if you were against the motion before you entered the room this evening, please raise your hands and say nay. And if you had no particular opinion on the motion before you entered the room this evening, please raise your hand and say nay. And now for the vote of speaker performance. So if you felt that the proposition managed to state their case effectively and would convince you of their case this evening, please raise your hands and say aye. You can't vote for yourself. And if you thought the opposition stated the case more effectively, please raise your hands and say nay.
Lucky Jeremy.
Hands nice and high, folks, one more time.
And if you thought that both sides spoke equally well or equally poorly, as the case may be, please raise your hands and again say nay. Shut up, ladies and gentlemen. For the second week in a row, the House has voted that it has no particular opinion on the motion and abstaining on the motion. And that's basically it for the 160th session. My gavel and bury it certain fathoms beneath the earth. And deeper than did ever plummet sound, all will drown in the minute book. Never be heard, never again. And for the last time this session, I say to you, lovely people, this meeting is adjourned. Let's go to the pub. Just before I do that, I forgot I'm actually supposed to hand over the box and my robe to the next president. It's not a tradition, but I'm making a tradition. Yes, take off my robe. Take it all off.
Keep going.
I feel like a ruffian. One of the lads off the estate.
Am I wearing this correctly? Is it sitting right? It doesn't feel like it. But am I wearing this?
That's actually the right size.
Can we make Can we make the house aware that that's a woman's small robe?
I have a very petite figure.
I don't stop.